Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
You reach into your pocket. Your heart drops. It's not there. No phone, no maps, no money, and not a single phone number memorized in your head. In a city of 8 million people, you've just become a ghost. This is Liam's reality. He's miles from home with no way to pay for a bus and no way to call for help. When the digital world vanishes, how do you survive a modern city using only your wits and the kindness of strangers? Today, we're following Liam's journey back from the brink. We aren't just telling a story, we're breaking down the essential vocabulary, phrasal verbs, and idioms you need to navigate high-stakes social dilemmas in English. If you've ever felt lost in translation, or just plain lost, this lesson is for you. By the end of this 10-chapter journey, you'll learn how to describe panic, how to negotiate in a crisis, and the analog English skills that saved Liam's night. Let's dive into Chapter 1, The Vanishing Act.
The sun was a golden coin hanging between the skyscrapers of the downtown district. Liam leaned against a brick wall, watching the rhythmic chaos of the city. He had spent the last 3 hours exploring hidden alleyway murals and local boutiques, a perfect Saturday spent in a neighborhood he rarely visited. It was time to head back to his side of town, so he reached into his right jeans pocket to check the bus schedule. His hand met nothing but denim. A cold prickle of sweat broke out across his forehead. He checked the left pocket. Empty. He patted his jacket, his chest, and then his back pockets with increasing franticness. His breathing quickened, turning into shallow, jagged gasps. Just 10 minutes ago, he had been a confident man with the world at his fingertips. Now he felt like a diver whose oxygen tank had just hissed its last breath. Inside that phone was his digital life, his bank cards, the GPS coordinates to his apartment, and every contact he had ever made since moving to the city. He didn't know his best friend's number. He didn't even know his own landlord's name. In a flash of terrifying clarity, Liam realized he was standing in a concrete labyrinth with no money, no map, and no way to tell anyone he was in trouble. He looked at the sea of people rushing past him. Everyone was looking down at their own screens, glowing rectangles guiding their lives. To them, he was just another stranger. To the city, he had just become a ghost.
Liam forced himself to take a deep breath, trying to still the trembling in his hands. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He closed his eyes, visualizing his movements over the last hour like a film reel playing in reverse. First, there was the crowded park bench where he had paused to watch a group of skateboarders. Then the small coffee shop where the steam from his latte had fogged up his glasses. Finally, the street performers' circle, where a magician had pulled a white rabbit out of a hat to a roar of applause. He sprinted back toward the park, his boots pounding against the pavement as he dodged businessmen and tourists. He reached the bench, but it was now occupied by an elderly woman reading a newspaper. The space beneath it was empty. Heart sinking, he dashed toward the coffee shop, the bell jingling frantically as he burst through the door. The barista looked up, offering a sympathetic but firm shake of her head before he could even speak. "Nothing turned in yet, honey," she said, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the espresso machine. Liam stumbled back outside, the cool evening air feeling much colder than it had 10 minutes ago. He reached the spot where the magician had performed, but the sidewalk was swept clean, the crowd long since dispersed. The realization was a heavy weight in his chest. The phone wasn't just misplaced, it was gone. He looked at a passing teenager and opened his mouth to ask to borrow a phone, but the words died in his throat. He realized with a jolt of horror that even if he had a phone in his hand, he didn't have a single number stored in his brain. In the age of instant connection, he was more isolated than he had ever been in his life. Liam stood on the corner of 5th and Main, feeling the invisible wall between him and the rest of the world. He tried to catch the eye of a businessman rushing past, but the man adjusted his wireless earbuds and pivoted away without a second glance. To the crowd, Liam was just another person in a hurry, yet he felt as though he were waving a flare in the middle of a dark ocean. He approached a woman waiting at a crosswalk and cleared his throat, his voice sounding raspy and unfamiliar. "Excuse me, I've lost my phone and I'm stranded. Could I possibly make a quick call?" The woman gripped her purse a little tighter, offering a tight, nervous smile, before stepping onto the street as the light changed. He felt the sting of the urban paradox. The more people there are around you, the harder it is to find someone who will stop. Finally, he stepped into a small, dusty convenience store where the scent of spices and old newsprint filled the air. The shopkeeper, a man with tired eyes and a graying beard, looked up from a crossword puzzle. "I'm in a bit of a bind," Liam said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've lost everything. Can I use your landline?" The man studied Liam's face for a long beat before silently sliding a heavy, corded black telephone across the counter. Liam picked up the receiver, his finger hovering over the keypad as the dial tone buzzed like an angry insect in his ear. It was then that the true nightmare began. He stared at the buttons, but his mind was a complete blank. He knew his mother's face, his sister's laugh, and his boss's office layout, but their phone numbers were locked away in a device that was no longer in his pocket. He closed his eyes, desperately trying to visualize the screen of his contacts list, but no digits appeared. He set the receiver back down with a hollow click, the shopkeeper watching him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "I don't know the numbers," Liam whispered, the weight of his digital dependency finally crushing him. He walked back out into the neon glow of the evening, realizing that being connected had made him completely helpless.
The adrenaline that had fueled Liam's frantic search began to ebb, leaving a hollow, gnawing ache in its wake. It wasn't just the stress. His stomach let out a low, traitorous growl that echoed against the brick buildings. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the savory scent of street food, halal carts, and hot pretzels seemed to mock him from every corner. He reflexively reached for his phone to tap and pay for a quick snack, only to feel the crushing emptiness of his pocket once again. He checked his small coin pocket, hoping for a miracle, but all he found was a paperclip and a crumpled receipt. In a world moving toward a cashless society, Liam realized he was effectively penniless despite having a healthy savings account. The humility of his situation started to sink in as he stood near a drinking fountain in a public square. He watched people casually swiping cards and scanning QR codes, a seamless dance of commerce that he was no longer invited to. Thirst eventually won out over pride, and he approached a street vendor with a hesitant, embarrassed look. "I'm so sorry to ask," Liam began, his face flushing a deep red, "but I've lost my phone and my wallet. Could I just have a cup of tap water?" The vendor, busy flipping burgers, didn't even look up as he pointed a spatula toward a stack of plastic cups. Liam took one, feeling the weight of his sudden poverty as he filled it at the lukewarm fountain. The water tasted like iron, but it did little to dull the hunger or the growing sense of vulnerability. He sat on a stone ledge, watching the city's neon signs flicker to life, advertising luxuries he couldn't even dream of touching tonight.
Without money, he couldn't take a taxi, he couldn't buy a bus pass, and he certainly couldn't buy his way out of this mess. He was surrounded by abundance, yet he was starving in plain sight, a passenger in a city that required a digital ticket to ride. The realization hit him. He wasn't just lost, he was completely disconnected from the machinery of modern life.
The last traces of orange faded from the horizon, replaced by the deep, bruised purple of a city twilight. Liam looked up, but the familiar stars were drowned out by the aggressive glow of billboards and street lamps. Without a GPS blue dot to guide him, the streets he had walked an hour ago now looked like a shifting, hostile maze. He stood at a major intersection, trying to remember if he had traveled north or south to get here. He remembered crossing a bridge earlier that afternoon, its steel cables cutting a silhouette against the sun. Squinting through the haze of traffic, he spotted the faint blinking red lights of a distant radio tower toward the east. He used it as a makeshift North Star, a fixed point in a world that suddenly felt fluid and unreliable. "Go toward the river," he muttered to himself, his voice lost in the roar of a passing subway train beneath his feet. He began to walk, paying attention to the slope of the road and the way the wind felt against his face. He noticed things he had ignored for years, the moss on the north side of old stone buildings and the direction of the evening shadows. Every block felt twice as long as it used to when he was distracted by a screen or a podcast. His feet began to ache, the steady rhythm of his footsteps the only soundtrack to his growing isolation. He passed a group of tourists huddled around a single smartphone, their faces illuminated by its pale blue light. He felt a pang of intense jealousy. They held a compass, a map, and a lifeline in the palm of a hand. Liam kept his eyes on the horizon, navigating by instinct and the silhouettes of skyscrapers he thought he recognized. The city felt massive, an endless grid of concrete that seemed designed to swallow anyone who didn't follow the digital trail. He was moving, but the lack of a destination reached notification made every step feel like a gamble.
Liam stumbled upon a branch of the public library, its grand stone pillars standing like sentinels against the modern glass towers. He stepped inside, the sudden silence of the lobby ringing in his ears after the chaos of the streets. He headed straight for the computer terminals, a spark of hope reigniting in his chest. If he could just log into his email or social media, he could message a friend to come and rescue him. But as he sat down, the screen demanded a password, followed immediately by a request for a one-time verification code. The code had been sent to his missing phone, a digital gatekeeper refusing to let him into his own life. Frustrated, he pushed back from the desk and wandered into the stacks, his eyes landing on a section labeled Reference. There, sitting on a bottom shelf, was a thick, yellowed volume, the city phone book. It felt strangely heavy and ancient in his hands, a relic from a time before everyone carried a database in their pocket. He flipped through the pages, the scent of old paper filling his senses as he searched for a name he recognized. He found a listing for a local locksmith and a taxi service, scribbling the numbers onto a scrap of paper with a borrowed pencil. Next, he pulled down a large-scale folding map of the metropolitan area, spreading it out across a wooden table. He traced his finger from the library's location all the way across the grid to his own neighborhood. He memorized the sequence: 4 blocks east, a left at the cathedral, and then the long trek down Atlantic Avenue. For the first time all night, the map wasn't a moving dot. It was a static, reliable picture of the world. He folded his handwritten notes into his pocket, feeling a strange sense of empowerment in his new analog skills. He left the library not as a ghost, but as a man with a physical plan and a destination etched into his mind.
Liam stood outside the library, clutching his handwritten notes like a treasure map. He knew exactly where he needed to go, but the distance was daunting, and his legs were starting to feel like lead. He reached the central bus hub, watching the heavy vehicles pull away with a hiss of air brakes and a cloud of exhaust. He checked the fare box from a distance. He was only a few dollars short of a ticket, yet it might as well have been $1 million. Near the benches, a group of college students sat laughing, their backpacks tossed carelessly on the ground. Liam took a deep breath, pushing aside the last of his pride as he approached them. "Hey, I'm in a weird spot," he said, holding up his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "I lost my phone and my wallet tonight." The students looked up, their expressions shifting from curiosity to the familiar, guarded skepticism of the city. "I need a bus pass to get home, and I'm willing to trade these for whatever cash you have." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his high-end, noise-canceling headphones, a gift to himself that had cost a fortune. The students exchanged glances, the high-quality leather and sleek metal of the headphones gleaming under the streetlights. One of them reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and some loose change. "That's all I've got on me, man," the student said, looking at the headphones that were worth 10 times that amount. Liam didn't hesitate. He dropped the headphones into the student's hand and snatched the cash. It was a terrible trade, a desperate move in a lopsided world, but the paper felt more valuable than gold in that moment. He fed the bills into the automated kiosk and clutched the thin plastic transit card that popped out of the slot. As he boarded the bus, he felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, despite the heavy loss he had just taken. He sat by the window, watching his reflection in the dark glass, a man who had traded his luxury for his liberty.
The bus hissed to a stop at the edge of his district, the doors folding open like a tired accordion. Liam stepped off into the cool night air, the familiar scent of the river and a nearby bakery hitting him instantly. He was closer to home, but the final 3 miles felt like a marathon across an alien landscape. Usually this walk was a blur of neon lights and digital distractions, his mind occupied by a podcast or a playlist. Now, without his headphones or his screen, the city felt unnervingly loud and aggressively physical. Every siren in the distance sounded sharper, every shadow cast by a flickering streetlight seemed deeper. He walked with his head up, his senses heightened as he navigated by the landmarks he had memorized in the library. He passed the old stone cathedral, its Gothic spires reaching into the dark like jagged teeth against the sky. He counted the blocks, ticking them off in his head. 1, 2, 3, then a sharp left onto Atlantic Avenue. Without the constant reassurance of a blue dot on a map, he had to trust his own eyes and his own memory. He noticed the cracks in the sidewalk, the way the wind whistled through the fire escapes, and the rhythm of the city's late-night heartbeat. A group of rowdy revelers spilled out of a bar, their laughter echoing off the brick walls and making him jump. He felt exposed and vulnerable, a traveler in a world that moved too fast for anyone on foot. His legs ached with every step, the physical toll of the night finally catching up to his exhausted mind. Yet there was a strange clarity in the silence, a feeling of being truly present in a place he usually ignored. He turned the final corner, his heart leaping as he spotted the familiar green awning of his apartment building. He had made it across the labyrinth, but the final and most difficult hurdle was still waiting for him at the door.
Liam stood before the heavy glass doors of his apartment building, his breath hitching in his chest. He reached for the pocket where his keys usually lived, but his fingers met that familiar, mocking emptiness.
His electronic key fob was tucked neatly inside the leather folds of his lost phone case. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, looking at the brightly lit lobby that was only inches away, yet completely unreachable. The intercom system stared back at him, a digital gatekeeper that required him to dial a code he no longer possessed. He tried to remember the apartment numbers of his neighbors, but the names on the directory were just a blur of strangers. He sat on the cold concrete steps, his head in his hands, as the reality of his exile finally settled over him. The city hummed around him, indifferent to the man locked out of his own life by a missing piece of plastic. Nearly an hour passed before a taxi pulled up to the curb and a woman hopped out, juggling a bag of groceries. Liam stood up quickly, his sudden movement making her flinch as she reached for her own key fob. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I live in 4B. I lost my phone and my keys tonight." The neighbor, a woman he had passed in the hallway a dozen times without speaking, studied his exhausted, disheveled face. She saw the sincerity in his eyes and the way his shoulders slumped with a fatigue that couldn't be faked. Without a word, she swiped her fob, and the magnetic lock released with a soft, mechanical click that sounded like music. "Rough night?" she asked gently as she held the door open, her voice the first kind thing he had heard in hours. "The longest of my life," Liam replied, stepping into the warmth of the lobby and feeling the weight of the world lift. He watched the elevator doors close, realizing that even the best technology was no match for a simple human connection. The sun rose slowly, casting long, pale shadows across Liam's living room floor. He sat on his sofa in total silence, the ticking of a wall clock he usually ignored filling the quiet apartment. His hands felt strangely light and restless, twitching occasionally toward his empty coffee table to check for notifications. Last night he had felt like a ghost, but this morning he felt like a survivor who had returned from a different era. A neighbor's spare key and a borrowed laptop had allowed him to finally lock his accounts and order a replacement device. But as he waited for the world to come back online, he found himself reaching for a physical pen and a fresh notepad. He began to write, his hand awkward at first as he scrawled down the phone numbers of his parents, his sister, and his best friend. He realized that relying on a single glass rectangle for his identity, his memory, and his safety was a dangerous gamble. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, seeing it not as a digital grid, but as a living, breathing landscape of landmarks. He felt a new sense of confidence, knowing that he could navigate those streets using only his eyes and his intuition. He tucked the handwritten list of numbers into his physical wallet, right next to a crisp $20 bill he intended to keep for emergencies. Technology would eventually return to his pocket, but the lessons of the digital ghost would stay in his mind forever. He realized that being connected to the internet was convenient, but being connected to his surroundings was essential. Liam took a deep breath, stood up, and headed out for a walk, this time looking up at the world instead of down at a screen. The labyrinth hadn't changed, but for the first time in years, Liam knew exactly where he was. The digital world was a tool, but the real world was where he truly lived.
The city didn't look different on Sunday morning, but Liam felt as though he were seeing it in high definition for the first time. The terror of the previous night had faded into a quiet, profound realization. We live in a world where our entire lives, our money, our memories, and our maps are tethered to a single device.
Without it, we aren't just inconvenienced, we are invisible. As Liam tucked a hand-drawn map and a list of emergency numbers into his jacket, he realized that true security isn't found in a signal or a battery percentage. It's found in the ability to read the sky, the courage to talk to a stranger, and the resilience to find your own way home. He was no longer a ghost in the machine. He was a man back in control. Liam made it home, but he didn't just find his apartment. He found a side of himself he didn't know existed. In a world that is 100% digital, having analog survival skills isn't just a hobby, it's a necessity. How many of the idioms we use today did you catch? From lopsided trades to digital ghosts, these are the phrases that describe our modern struggles. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been stranded without your phone? What was the one thing you missed the most? Drop your story in the comments below using at least one phrasal verb we learned today. I'll be hearting the best stories and correcting your grammar as we go. If you want to keep building your English through real-life dilemmas like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We have more stories to tell, and we're just getting started. Don't let your English skills become a vanishing act. Keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.